So welcome to another edition of Perspective 254. My name is Agility Kesa. A few weeks ago, the Nation Media Group introduced us to a new word, Mpiaro, complete with an example of what Mpiaro looks like. Now we all know what Mpiaro looks like. Now, thanks to Nation Media Group, next time your friend is running his mouth, bila kujalia, anaongea ujinga tuputupu, then you can tell him to stop being Mpiaro. Or you could just tell him to stop being a Moses. Either way, he will get the message. It is on that same spirit that I too today would like to introduce you guys to a new one. Dictator. Dictator. We all remember Daniel Arap Moi, right? Don't we? The professor of politics that ruled this beautiful country for a good 24 years, from 1978 to 2002, I think. The good professor of politics sure did have his bad side. Nobody said he was perfect. President Moi came to power in 1978 after the death of the founding father, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. The first signs of Moi being a dictatorial ruler did not show until 1982 when there was an attempted coup against his government. I recently read this very curious and honestly head-scratching quote by some political analysts called David McCarthy that said something along the lines of, if Ruto turns into a dictator, then it is Raila's fault, or something along those lines. I am not going to debate the folly of that statement or give it any more airtime than it actually deserves. It is indeed a foolish thing to say in defense of somebody who's already exhibiting dictatorial tendencies. Michelle Obama, the one-time First Lady of the United States, once said, "The presidency does not change who you are, it actually reveals who you are as a person." But then again, according to Kenya Kwanza, it's always Raila's fault. Everything is Raila and Uhuru's fault, and the handshake. That's their argument. However, the fundamental question here is, are dictators made or are dictators born? Think of these guys: Idi Amin, Hitler, Mobutu Sese Seko, Robert Mugabe, Muammar Gaddafi, Omar al-Bashir, and many others. Were they born dictators, or did they turn into dictators at some point in their leadership? At least in the case of Moi, we can pinpoint to the 1982 attempted coup as the turning point that led to him being what he ended up being, the dictator. What about folks like Idi Amin, though? Was he born that way, or did he turn into a dictator at some point? Just because folks are already talking about the possibility of Mr. Ruto turning into a dictator, as in the case of David McCarthy, is already an indication that they have seen the signs. The writing is on the wall, and they see a dictator in them. The signs were there long before Raila and his meal started the whole Maandamano thing. What the Maandamano thing is accomplishing here is simply bringing out the dictator that was already inside Mr. Ruto, or Dr. Ruto, my bad. David Murathe, the Jubilee vice chairman, actually called it long before Ruto won the election to become the Kenya's fifth president. Here's what he said. Besides Murathe, lots of people have also accused Ruto of showing dictatorial tendencies. They argue that he has shown a propensity to centralize power and silence the opposition. These critics point into instances of perceived intimidation of political rivals, manipulation of democratic process, and an alleged disregard for the rule of law. Ruto's political strategies may also be indicative of a potential shift towards a one-party state. Dr. Ruto has only been in power for 9 months, and so far, we have witnessed the following under his leadership. First of all, there's the arrest of political leaders, opposition leaders, including Embakasi East MP Babu Owino, Ken Chonga, the MP for Kilifi South, Honorable Teddy Mwambire, Speaker Kilifi County, Nairobi MCS, Wilfred Odalo, Redson Onyango, Eric Otieno, and Anthony Otsualo. Raila Odinga's bodyguard, Maurice Ogeta, has also been arrested. Alongside these arrests and detentions of opposition leaders, we also see other tendencies taken straight out of the late Mzee Moi's playbook. Examples here include, number one, roadside declarations on policy issues and which way the country needs to lean on the said issues, directing his UDA MPs on how to vote on certain bills, specifically the finance bill, and the consequences of not towing the line, retribution against perceived enemies, Good examples being his treatment of the former President President Uhuru's family, Uhuru Kenyatta and First Lady's security getting withdrawn or reduced, Mama Ngina's security getting withdrawn altogether and forcing her to hire private security. Former Super Cabinet Secretary Dr. Matiang'i, you remember him? Getting arrested on trumped-up charges, and then later, of course, they were withdrawn. And then there is the IEBC crew that dare disagree with Mr. Chebukati's pronouncement of Ruto's win, famously referred to as the Cherera Four, getting bundled out of the commission soon after Ruto took power. And then there's attempts at killing off the opposition by encouraging defections from other parties into UDA. Earlier demonstrations on Sabasaba Day were characterized by extreme police brutality against unarmed demonstrators. Reports indicate that several demonstrators were killed by police. Tragically, some of the dead were going about their daily business when police opened fire on them. The police also arrested tens of demonstrators. Well, these have since been released without any charges. Before they were released, though, human rights advocates, including former Chief Justice Willie Mutunga, who had also gone to the police station to demand their unconditional release, were tear-gassed by the police. Local and international human rights organizations have condemned police brutality during the demonstrations. Police brutality on Sabasaba Day and the tear gassing of opposition leaders such as Martha Karua and human rights advocates such as Willie Mutunga and the alleged attempt on Raila Odinga's life point to the painful ironies of history. In the original Sabasaba demonstrations in 1990, hundreds of unarmed pro-democracy protesters were shot dead. Mr. Odinga, Kenneth Matiba, Charles Rubia, George Anyona, Professor Bodo Kariuki had been arrested. Mr. Mutunga had done a stint in detention for his pro-democracy stance at the time. Others, such as the late Misere Mugo, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and Ngugi wa Buri, had also escaped into exile after learning of a sinister plot to execute a final solution to their continued refusal to sing like parrots, as the then President Daniel Arap Moi demanded of every Kenyan. During the struggle for the second liberation and the lead up to the 1992 multi-party elections, William Ruto belonged to the notorious, vehemently pro-government outfit called the Youth for KANU 92, Y2K 92. Rigathi Gachagua was a feared district officer in Limuru, ruthlessly enforcing the KANU dictatorship in Limuru. Now, they are the president and the deputy president in overall charge of the police action against the demonstrators. The ironies of history, huh? Well, reason would dictate that Ruto and Gachagua try to countervail that burdensome history by being vehement custodians of the democracy brought about by the Sabasaba demonstrations of 1990. This would mean instructing the police to do everything in their power to facilitate picketing. This attitude would not only serve to countervail the history of vehement and violent defense of dictatorship, but also serve them politically by pulling the rug under the feet of the opposition. They press the issue, instead, paint them as people who have never embraced the tenets of democracy, including freedom of assembly and the right to peacefully demonstrate. Police should only intervene when demonstrators become violent. Many observers have noted that in most cases, violence is actually started by the police. No one should get arrested or lose their lives for demonstrating against the government policies. That is just unacceptable. Part 2. Popular support versus a parliamentary majority. Ruto is grappling with the repercussions of mistaking a parliamentary majority for widespread public support. William Ruto, who emerged victorious in a tough competition to become the country's fifth president, appeared to be in a strong position at the start of the year. Despite the political maneuvers of his predecessor and against all odds, Ruto won the election. His main competitor, Raila Odinga, faltered not only in the lead up to the election, but also afterwards when his challenge to the election results was proved to be a sham. Ruto's influence seemed to grow in the following months. He seemed to be carving out an image for himself as a forthright speaker on the global stage, earning some praise despite his transparent efforts to rebuild his image after attempting to persuade the African Union to withdraw en masse from the Rome Statute in 2013. This was after he and President Uhuru Kenyatta became the first incumbent head of state and deputy to face trial before the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. Meanwhile, his opponent, Odinga, appeared to be struggling to counter him from the sidelines. Early in Ruto's administration, defections from Odinga's coalitions solidified Ruto's majority in both houses of parliament, ensuring his legislative agenda would face minimal obstacles. Case in point was the controversial finance bill of 2023. However, the tide seems to be changing. Ruto's administration's nearly 4.5 trillion shilling budget and the taxes that it plans to impose on the Kenyans to fund this budget have given Odinga a boost, fueling public protests and huge support for the said protests. Even in areas that had voted for Ruto, people are actually expressing their anger at Parliament's approval of the Finance Act and the President's ratification of the Act, making it into a law eventually. The law, which is opposed by at least 70% of Kenyans, would double VAT on fuel, leading to a rise in prices across board, introduce an unpopular housing levy, and increase taxes on digital content producers and employees earning more than 500,000 shillings a month. Over the past 2 weeks, at least 13 Kenyans have been killed in public protests, primarily focused on the rising cost of living in Kenya. Ruto appears to be encountering the boundaries of his authority. His absolute majorities in both houses of parliament and his control of the executive may have somewhat obscured a clear and fundamental weakness. He lacks a strong mandate. In last year's election, he barely won with just over half of the vote, that's 50.7%, in a poll boycotted by more than a third of the electorate. From such a weak position, he can ill afford to antagonize the Kenyans. History has demonstrated the danger of equating a parliamentary majority with popular legitimacy, or worse, believing that it supersedes popular legitimacy. Ruto's predecessor also boasted a supermajority, just like Ruto, the so-called tyranny of numbers. He misused it by pushing through unpopular laws, and just like Ruto today, was also plagued by increasing revelations of corruption. With the erosion of this popular legitimacy, his ability to govern dwindled. Despite winning a second term, only the handshake with Raila Odinga afforded him the room to rule. In fact, the humbling of would-be autocrats has been a recurring theme in Kenyan history over the past 30 years, and it is one that Ruto would be wise to heed. The ability to command the loyalty of the police force that can kill and brutalize your perceived enemies, and a compliant, corrupt parliament that can give your oppression the veneer of law, however, in the end will only delay an inevitable reckoning of the people. It took Kenyans a long time, many deaths, and much miming to win back the ability to impose their will on those who would rule over them. The various struggles to free themselves from the British and those who came after culminated in the adoption of the 2010 Constitution, the first indigenously crafted and popularly endorsed system of government, and the first to recognize that sovereignty and power reside in and are drawn from the people. Winning an election may give one access to public power, but that access has to be constantly negotiated during one's term. And the people's consent can be withdrawn at any time with or without an intervening election. That is the essence of government by consent rather than government by coercion. It is not about how many MPs support you. Rather, it is about how many Kenyans do. In the period from 2013 to 2017, the Jubilee coalition, which initially consisted of nearly 10 political parties, decided to merge into a single political entity known as the Jubilee Party. This significant decision was largely influenced by the then Deputy President, William Ruto, who had previously been mentored by the late President Daniel Arap Moi. Before the abolition of Section 2A in 1992, Kenya was a one-party state under the control of KANU, led by President Moi. During Moi's reign, Ruto was a key figure in YK92, a state-funded youth wing of KANU, which was notorious for its violent suppression of opposition voices from 1990 to 1994. Ruto's time in KANU exposed him to the power dynamics and political efficiency of a one-party state. After KANU was ousted from power in 2002, Ruto and other political figures such as Uhuru Kenyatta had to navigate their own political futures. Kenyatta took over the leadership of KANU, while Ruto joined ODM 3 years later. Fast forward to the present, and Ruto still has a preference for centralized power. And this is a concern given the fact that Ruto is now the president and could potentially steer Kenya back towards the one-party state. And that, ladies and gentlemen, marks the end of our episode for tonight. This has been Perspective 254, and let's meet next time for the next episode. Cheers.